Patch 1.6 details have just been released and they are huge. Ladies and gentlemen, in this video, we're going to go through all of the patch details and have a look at how they are going to change the game when patch 1.6 finally lands. Stick around. What's up guys, it's Skill up here. I am back from my little trip to Melbourne. Thank you everyone for your kind comments that you left on my $600 vendor reset video fail. I really appreciate that. I wanted to jump straight into the mix now and talk about what's coming down the pipe for patch 1.6. Quick note, this is a long video, and so what I've done is I've actually broken it up, and you're going to see timestamps down below. So check those and you're going to be able to jump to the sections that are most relevant to you. And with that, let's get straight into the detail. Alright, so let's get some logistics out the way first. There is a difference between patch 1.6 and the Last Stand DLC. We're of an understanding that both of them are going to be dropping at the same time, but that's not confirmed yet. Either way, patch 1.6 is a free drop for all three platforms that arrives simultaneously on Xbox, PC, and PS4, and that brings with it a whole bunch of balance changes and new features and all sorts of stuff that I'm going to talk about in this video. Separate to that is the Last Stand DLC, and that DLC is paid. It's coming out also on all three platforms at the same time, and it contains the dedicated Last Stand PvP game mode, which is that capture the objective kind of game mode that we've heard about earlier, as well as the new incursion. So those are the only two things that you need to pay for. The PvP game mode and the incursion are paid DLC. Everything else is free, and all of the content comes on all three platforms at the same time. Thank God for that. It's worth noting that there is no gear score increase with this update. In previous updates, we've had to grind the same gear again, but just at a higher gear score. Not this time around. All of the gear that you have is still good to go, which means you'll be able to jump straight into the new action as soon as you log in. Patch 1.6 is the dedicated PvP patch, so it's little surprise that some very large changes are coming to the Dark Zone. First up, the Dark Zone is a hell of a lot bigger. They're adding 3 new Dark Zone areas, Dark Zone 7, 8, and 9. And the developers explained that even though there's only 3 new areas, the total playable size of those 3 areas is roughly the same as the existing Dark Zone areas because they have lots of verticality and lots of underground areas to traverse. So even though it's only 3 areas, it really is like the Dark Zone instantly became twice as large. Now, interestingly enough, the developers have taken the decision to keep the population size of the DZ servers exactly the same as they were before, even though they're making the Dark Zone twice as large. Some of you might know that the Dark Zone populations are capped at 24 people per instance, which means that you're never going to see more than 24 people in your individual Dark Zone. That number remains constant now, even though there is literally twice as much space to operate in. And I think there's some mixed reception to that idea. Some people really like the idea that you're going to be able to cruise the Dark Zone with relatively more safety because you're going to be less likely to encounter other players. At the same time, many people go to the Dark Zone to PvP, and to now know that it's going to be even harder to find that PvP action, many people are not quite satisfied with that. Personally, I think this is a really good change. The Dark Zone is not meant to be this gigantic, constant mess of PvP as it often descends into. It's meant to be a tense environment that you can carefully explore either solo or in a group. It really is up to you, and this larger playable area is going to make it a lot easier for people to determine the conditions in which they engage the enemy or they choose not to. Obviously, it remains to be seen exactly how this plays out. We do need to see the design of the areas and how that all works when we get into the PTS, but for now, I do think it's the right sort of direction from the Dark Zone, and I personally am looking forward to getting in there a bit more than I did in the previous patches. They've made some other changes to those new Dark Zone areas as well. The new landmarks that have been added can have multiple waves of enemies spawn after you kill the first wave. They just keep coming at you, and when you clear all waves, you actually get loot directly into your backpack, so you don't need to extract it. This is great because it incentivizes to actually clear landmarks rather than just kill the boss and then move on, which happens all too often. And it also means that you are rewarded properly for making the effort. So I think great change there. The last change is that you are now allowed to fast travel between dark zone checkpoints, but you could kind of already do this. You just needed to go out the extra door. So really this is just a very basic quality of life change that saves you from having to zone through one extra door. No big deal. One of the new features announced for 1.6 are Contamination Events. Now, they were very tight-lipped on these in the release, but like butter, provided us with some additional details on these. Long story short, every hour or so, you will receive a notification telling you that a Contamination Event is active somewhere. You head down in there, and you have to be on the lookout for high-level cleaners. Butter informs us there's only a few of them down there. It's not a whole bunch, it's really just 1 or 2 named enemies. But the challenge is that there is a lot of area damage affecting you at the time that will kill you very quickly if you stay down there too long. Anyone that's done underground and has that directive that constantly damages you, it's like that, but it's meant to be supercharged. So really, you can't easily heal through it with passive heals. You've got to get in and out quickly or you will die. I'm a big fan of these supply drops. I always try and get those whenever I'm in the dark zone, and so to know that there's another kind of timed event that players are going to be vying for is, I think, a really good thing. So I think great addition here. One feature that I am particularly excited about is the inclusion of legendary difficulty. Now, you guys know that obviously I'm someone that wants a challenging PVE endgame experience, and right now there is absolutely nothing to challenge hardcore, dedicated players who are really experienced and know how to build their characters. Legendary difficulty is meant to be just that. Now, it's available for 3 missions: Times Square, Warren Gate, and the Napalm production site. It's meant to be the most challenging mode that the game has to offer and truly test dedicated hardcore PvE players. It will require proper group synergy and proper compositions to be able to break it, or at least that's what the developers say. The ETF members that were there said it was a definite step up, so that's a really good sign. The wording that was used in the article to describe how it works, I think, is really instructive. It said specifically that enemies were tuned to have similar amounts of damage output and health as they do on challenge mode, but the extra challenge is meant to come from the way that the AI is programmed. If you've ever gone up against a hunter in the survival mode, you know that those guys can certainly move. They are a hell of a lot smarter, more agile, and just more difficult than anything you face in the rest of the game. So imagine facing an entire room full of LMB, all of them as smart as hunters. That sounds like something I would be totally down for. One thing that Massive really got right with this was the reward structure. Legendary difficulty does not grant higher gear score items. It simply grants you loads of loot as you would expect. It grants you unique cosmetic items that you can't get anywhere else in the game. Great. And it also grants you a unique named weapon or item cache. You get at least one of those per week, perhaps more of them, it's not quite clear yet, which is a really good change, because right now the only way for us to reliably get those named gear pieces or weapons is just to endlessly grind against things like Lexington until we die of boredom. To now know that there is a weekly activity that we can do, log in, get it done, and get rewarded with a guaranteed named item, I think that is a fantastic direction forward for the game, and will definitely motivate hardcore players to keep logging in week after week and keep doing this more challenging activity. Named weapons have been a huge disappointment for a long time, but it looks like Massive are finally ready to right the ship on this and are delivering us some truly exceptional named weapons. It all starts with relabeling them. They're no longer known as named weapons, they're now known as exotic. And named gear pieces have also been renamed exotic as well. The new named weapons are the same as the old weapons in the sense that they have the same names, however they have completely different talents, and to be clear, Their first 2 talents roll as random talents, and the third free talent is their special exotic talent. Now I'm going to do a separate video covering the details of these exotic weapons once they have been confirmed by the developers, but as an example, some of them include the Hungry Hog, 20% damage increase per kill until you stop firing. And that continues to stack, by the way. So if you kill 3 red bar enemies, you are doing 60% extra damage until you take your finger off the trigger. If you are running meticulous and you keep getting your ammo back, it keeps stacking, baby. And funny story, that's actually my weapon design. I was chatting with the lead weapon designer when we were talking about different ways to buff the named weapons, and I threw out the idea of the Hungry Hog being exactly what this is now, and he liked the idea, and now it's in the game. So I'm really excited to see that, because I think that sounds like a hell of a lot of fun. The other one that I'm super excited about is the new Caduceus. Crits heal your entire team for 1% health. It's actually not based on damage. Now this is still likely to change, however it's very cool to know we've got a weapon that when you deal damage is going to be healing your entire team. I absolutely love that. Cannot wait to get my hands on that. And best of all, these changes are retroactive on your current named weapons. So if you've already got a 256 Caduceus sitting around in your inventory doing nothing, guess what? It's going to get this new talent. It is going to be buffed, and you are going to be able to use it straight away as soon as you log into patch 1.6. Not too bad at all. Now the challenge here for Massive will be to release a set of weapons that is strong and desirable without being must-haves. We cannot find ourselves in a meta where everyone is running around with a named or exotic weapon, I should say, without any exceptions. They need to be competitive, but they cannot be overwhelming. So it's going to be very interesting to see how Massive manage this challenge, because we don't want to be in a position where these weapons are released and then subsequently nerfed, because we've seen enough of that. And speaking of nerfs, alright guys, it's finally arrived. The Alpha Bridge nerf that we all knew was coming is finally here, and let's be real, it's totally fair. It sucks that we got to this point. It sucks that stuff gets nerfed. Absolutely. We all want our gear to be released and for us to earn it and for it to never be nerfed, because we all work hard to get it. But at the end of the day, when something is broken, it's broken and it needs to change. Alpha Bridge is mathematically always the best option to go with, because 6 weapon talents simultaneously is just well and truly more power than any other gear set is able to provide, with the exception of perhaps the defense gear set, which we'll come to in a moment as well. So what's the change here? Well, first up, you're not going to get access to 6 talents anymore. You're only going to get access to 4 of them. You're going to get the free talent on your second weapon. That is going to be activated when you're running Alpha Bridge. So right now that already sounds like it really sucks, but the other change that's gone through is that your first 2 talents on your primary weapon no longer have any stat requirements on them. So before, you always had to hit your stat requirements with your Alpha Bridge set in order to activate the talents, right? Now, it doesn't matter what stats you are running or what stats your weapon talents require, they are always going to be active. Those 4 talents will always be active so long as you are wearing the Alpha Bridge gear set. Absolutely, unquestionably, this is a nerf, no doubt about it, but as I said, let's be real, we needed to do away with Alpha Bridge because it was overwhelmingly powerful, and buffing everything else so that it was just as powerful as Alpha Bridge is not a sustainable way to manage the game in the long term. Now, the other gear set that's taken a big hit is the defense gear set. Now, that is the shield build. I did a video on that a while ago that's been quite popular, actually. It's a set that I absolutely love, but I will be the first to admit that it absolutely needed the edge taken off it. I could clear Lexington in about 8 minutes with that thing by the end after I refined my build down, and never once did I have to take cover, never once did I come anywhere close to dying. It was literally the ultimate face roll build, and that is not sustainable for the game in the long term. The new change now grants you the crit that was meant to be taken away from you, but it kind of wasn't taken away because they didn't really implement it properly. So now you can still still crit with your SMG, that's fine, but you can no longer apply any of the mods for your ballistic shield, namely the Assault mod, which gave you 20% bonus damage, plus stagger, plus reload speed, plus all this stuff that just made it super duper strong. So everyone's wondering right now, is this really a nerf or not? Yes, this is a gigantic nerf to this gear set. 20% damage on this is huge. Even when you get your crit back, it's still a massive hit to this set. But like I said, I firmly believe that the design of this set is to allow you to be an effective offensive shield tank, not to be this utterly invincible wall of bullets that was dealing more damage than Alpha Bridge because of the fact that you never ever had to stop firing because you never had to take cover. Something needed to happen, and I think this is actually a pretty good change. It's not all bad news though. Some stuff did get buffed, namely the Reclaimer gear set, which has been languishing in the last little while with a very confused identity. It's now the dedicated healer build. It now gives your support station, your little lunchbox that you drop on the floor, all 3 mods active at the same time, which is a really big boost to this thing, and it also increases the radius of the healing area. So that's a really nice buff, especially given that there's this Caduceus coming as well, which of course gives you bonus healing whenever you crit to your entire party. Some really big healer build opportunities have opened up with this set and with that weapon. Super pumped for those. Tactician's Authority also got a much needed buff, where before it used to constantly reset your stacks after 10 seconds. Now you lose those stacks when you use an ability, which is a much nicer change. A new gear set has also been added to the game. It's called the Seeker gear set, and I gotta be straight with you, I think it's pretty much the worst gear set that's ever been added to the game. The 2-piece bonus gives you 10% body shot damage, 3 pieces gives you 30% critical hit damage, and 4 pieces gives you this. After 2 consecutive shots to the body, your next shot is a guaranteed critical hit. Now, let's break this down. There is no way in hell we should be adding a gear set that literally just jacks your stats for shooting at your target in the body. That is not a pattern of play that we should be rewarding. If we look at things like Firecrest, or the upcoming Reclaimer, or the Ballistic Shield build, or all these sorts of gear sets that reward individual, unique, interesting styles of play, leveraging abilities, that works, that is fun, that is interesting. Rewarding people with a guaranteed 33% chance to crit just for landing body shots is definitely not the right way to go, especially when we are trying to escape the super annoying PvP hipfire meta, where shooting someone in the chest is generally what you are aiming to do. My sincere hope, and I do believe it fairly inevitable at this point given the amount of backlash that this gear set has received, my sincere hope is that this is radically revisited and changed, because I do not believe that this set should make it into the live game. Massive have taken some very bold steps to address 2 long-standing issues with the game. The first is armor, and the second is the way that resistances work and are able to be stacked. Let's talk armor first. Right now, armor is unquestionably the single greatest stat in the game. Absolutely nothing comes close. The entire meta for every set basically was built around rolling a core stat and then of course having armor in that stat slot after that to make sure that you're maximizing your toughness. Armor scaled in an exponential fashion, meaning the more you had, the better it got, and it got completely out of hand. Build diversity was certainly a thing of the past owing to this stat. So rather than trying to rebalance it, the developers have simply done away with it. Armor is now being replaced by plus health. So if you had any bonus armor on your gear, when you log in with patch 1.6, you're going to see it appearing as plus health. If you had any plus health rolls, that's now being replaced with a new stat called Resist All, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But I will say it's fantastic to know that this stat is changing. Armor added very little to the game. It made everyone really tanky and pushed everyone into exactly the same build type just because of how powerful it was in both PvE and PvP settings. The new Resist All stat is also a great inclusion. So just to break this down really simply, before, if you had like 50% bleed resistance, you actually had a 5 out of 10 chance to not have bleed apply to you at all. It was like a dice roll, yeah? Now they're changing the way that resistances are calculated so that if you have a 50% chance to resist bleed, what it's actually going to do is reduce the duration and the damage of that status effect by 50%, not give you a 50% chance to completely avoid it, because that just seems a bit counterintuitive. So this is a better way to calculate resistances. It's the way that most games do it, and I definitely welcome this change. The resist all stat essentially allows you to stack all of the different resistance types simultaneously. So if you're a serious PvP player, for example, resistance stacking is probably going to be a very good way to become a lot more effective in PvP, since resistances can have a very big impact on the power of your character in a given engagement. The developers also took a big swing at skill power. So right now, many of you will know that skill power is not particularly attractive because it has what's called diminishing returns, and they kick in very early. So the more you stack of skill power, the worse it gets, and that happens pretty early on. The developers have decided to revisit this decision now and are basically making it so that no diminishing returns kick in before 450,000 skill power. You're going to see some very, very strong skill power builds emerging as a result of this, which is actually going to be quite interesting for us to observe. Given the fact that we're not going to have any armor and much larger health pools, we're actually going to be a lot more reliant upon things like support station and heal actually providing us with a real amount of healing rather than just a small amount that still topped us off because we had these very small health pools. So this is actually a fairly seismic shift to the overall skill power meta. It opens up huge build diversity opportunities. Very glad to see that this is coming down the pipe. In addition to this, there are changes to things like sticky bomb and first aid and turret and signature skills and whatever. I mean, there's some changes there. None of them are particularly game changing though. I will say that they will have some minor impacts on both PvE and PvP, but you can read the patch notes for some more details on that. Alright, the big one now, changes to combat mechanics. Now obviously you guys know I did a 5-part series on PvP and how not great it is. One of those videos looks specifically at PvP combat and how that could be improved, and I'm glad to see that a lot of what I'd actually suggested has actually made it into this. So I'm going to talk through those changes now. First of all, increased time to revive a downed teammate from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. This basically was just too easy to get people up in the middle of a PvP encounter. It just prolonged them in a really unnecessary way, so this is a good change. Bleed no longer procs sprint. Instead, it reduces movement speed by 20%. Additional applications refresh the timer. So you might think that combat is a little bit speedier, but that's actually not the case, and we'll talk about why very soon. Ment kits can now be used at full health and cleanse the character of all status effect. Now this is great because status effects are a little bit too strong in PvP. In particular, things like being set on fire or shock turret really dominate the PvP scene, so the ability to escape these status effects by popping a med kit is going to be very welcome. Now the big one that's really divided the community is players are no longer able to reload their weapon and sprint at the same time. When sprinting, pressing reload will drop you out of sprint. When reloading, pressing sprint will interrupt the reload. Now this is something that I of course asked for, and I absolutely stand by it. The thing is, PvP combat is way too fast. But in particular, the moment after you've dumped your magazine, when you are most exposed, is the exact moment where people start sprinting and running in circles like they do in those Benny Hill clips that I showed in that PvP video earlier. Now I know it's obviously really inconvenient and it will slow combat down. People think that this is going to make for a less fun PvP experience, but PvP needs to be slowed down, and the pace of PvP very often happens during the reload window. That's the part where people are most running around in circles like idiots. So if people can no longer do that, I think that is something that is absolutely worth testing. Maybe it sucks. Maybe we play it and hey, you know what? This is not good, but it also could be just what PvP needs in order to slow it down appropriately. I would say though, I would prefer it if this change were only in effect in the PvP arenas or in the Dark Zone. Being able to sprint while reloading in the PvE game is fine. I don't see a problem with it at all, and I don't see why it should change. So if the developers could add some sort of toggle so that it only applies in PvP contexts, I think that would kind of make everybody happy. The other big one is that they are nerfing hipfire. Hipfire stability has been significantly reduced when moving, and the player camera will now be impacted by hipfire, reducing your field of view the longer you keep firing. So basically they want to make it really hard hard for you to keep hip firing. And I've heard from people that have tried this out that it actually does create a very debilitating experience and not ideal. So hopefully this does stamp out the hip fire spam meta, because Lord knows we don't need it in this game. The other big one is that combat roll now has a short cooldown of about 1 second each time you use it. This is another example. Things needed to change in PvP, and I really welcome this change. I actually asked specifically for this. However, at the same time, in PvE, this could be really problematic because certain PvE activities spam you so hard with grenades that you are absolutely reliant upon that roll not having a cooldown. So if we could keep no cooldowns in PvE environments and 1 second cooldown in PvP environments, I think that would be fine. Now, the other big problem with PvP combat was these all damage resistance buffs. I can say that they have been nerfed. On the Move has been reduced to 15% bonus. Battle Buddy has been reduced to 30%, and Critical Save has been reduced to 20%. These are very large nerfs for these abilities, but they are absolutely worthwhile. The cooldown trading minigame that everyone was playing just wasn't skillful or rewarding, so I'm very glad to hopefully see it gone with these changes. Finally, there's one change in here which I really don't like, which is that body shot damage has been slightly increased in PvP. It says this change does not apply to PvE and headshot damage remains the same. So what they've actually done here is that they've actually marked the chest of your PvP target as something separate from their limbs, their arms and their legs and their head. The chest itself will take additional damage. Now, I have no idea why they have done this. It makes no sense to me that, again, they want to reward people for just shooting people in the chest. It is the exact opposite of good skill-based PvP. I do believe that it is intended to reduce the skill gap between highly skilled and unskilled players, but I don't want that to be reduced. I want there to be a skill gap between skilled and highly skilled players, and the way you do that is by incentivizing skilled players to use their aim and aim for the head. So I absolutely think this change should go. I see no reason why body shots should be more rewarded than anything else, and I just think this is bad. Anyway, those are the combat changes. Very ambitious, very large scale. Some of them I'm sure are fantastic. Some of them I'm sure when we get in there and have a go with them, we find out they don't work. But don't forget, guys, this is a PTS. We are going to be able to give that feedback to Massive, and they are surely going to tweak it over the coming weeks while the PTS is live. One last PvP related change that didn't make it into the patch notes, but that did make it into a previous article that the developers released, was that the new Last Stand game mode is going to have skill-based matchmaking. So what does that mean? Skill-based matchmaking essentially looks at your performance or your record over time, and it gives you a bit of a rating in terms of how good or bad you are. And then when you matchmake into a queue, it's going to try and group really skilled players with other really skilled players and really not skilled players with each other, so that everyone is hopefully having a really rewarding match because they're playing against players of their own skill level. Now, this all sounds really good on paper, but we actually need to be really specific about how the matchmaking algorithm works. Because I can tell you this, Destiny's PvP over the last 12 months has been single-handedly ruined by skill-based matchmaking, because what the algorithm is doing is it's prioritizing skill over region and over ping and over connection. And it doesn't matter if you're up against other equally skilled players. If everyone is red bar lagged, teleporting about the map and rubber banding like crazy because you all have a terrible connection. So I don't know how Massive are going to manage this in terms of their server architecture. I don't know how they're going to manage the algorithm in terms of matchmaking, but I really hope that they are not going to prioritize skill over region, because if they do, I think that will greatly undermine the PvP experience. So hopefully we'll hear something from them on this soon, because it's a very big concern for me. There's a few other changes here that I didn't really cover in detail. Things like cool-headed, it seems, can now roll on automatic weapons once again, but it apparently has a bit of an internal cooldown to make sure it doesn't get too out of control. You can now do unlimited recalibrations, which is fantastic. You are limited now only by the funds that you have, not by the number of rolls available. There are changes to the survival game mode that will hopefully make it a lot safer for solo players to queue, since they are no longer going to get matched into a queue that has has groups in it. And finally, the underground is no longer going to reward base XP. It will only reward underground XP so that you're not getting double caches as you're grinding through it. So, general thoughts on this patch. I really like what I've seen. A dedicated PvP game mode is something we've been calling out for a long time now, and they've got this sort of interesting PvE PvP hybrid going on, which I'll do a video on later when I get my hands on it, but it's looking quite cool, and I actually really like that. I would have much preferred that rather than just a straight up sort of capture the flag or team deathmatch. It looks like they're doing cool stuff with it. I've heard that the new incursion is absolutely fantastic and kind of feels like a raid, so that remains to be seen, but I really hope the reward structure that's in there actually supports that and keeps players coming back, because things like Dragon's Nest is actually a pretty good incursion. It's just the fact that no one really goes there because the rewards just aren't worth it. So it'd be interesting to see how Massive tackle this problem. The changes that have been made to the PvP combat are all or most of them pretty sound. The newly added gear set Seeker I think is absolutely terrible, and I really hope it doesn't make it into the game. Same thing with the buff to body shot, that has to go. The nerfs to gear sets like Alpha Bridge and Defense sound fairly fair, while the buffs to Reclaimer and to Tactician's Authority are very welcomed and much needed. And overall, it just seems like a very nice, well-rounded package that I'm very keen to get into. Many people have commented that they're disappointed that 1.6 didn't bring some expansion to the story, new campaign, finding out Aaron Keener's deal, all that sort of stuff. And I gotta say, I do agree. I would have liked to have seen that sort of content as well, but we never know what Massive has planned. I mean, Year 2 content isn't confirmed at this point, but I think they'd be pretty crazy if they didn't stick with this game, given the fact that it's done fairly well for them after the 1.4 update really improved the game. 1.6 is, I think, a good, solid showing, but I do think it feels a little bit incomplete without some of that expansion to the story that we've all been hankering for. So Massive, I hope you're listening, and if you are, I really hope you start bringing that sort of content to us in the future, because it would be wonderful to see this beautiful world that you've built continue to be expanded upon. For now, guys, if you liked this video, do drop it a like, and if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button for end-to-end division coverage. Patch 1.6 on the PTS is live very, very soon. I can't wait to hop into it. Thank you for watching, take good care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.